Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 59, recorded June 2021. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we sit down with a Star Trek fan. We talk about their fandom and why this show means so much to all of us. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 59. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at Trek Profiles. Warning! As we recorded this, it was June 2021, so all previous Trek content up to and including that point is fair game and may be discussed during this episode. You have been warned, humans. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the daringly debonair, decidedly deadly, but never demure M5 Multitronic unit. Say hello to everyone, M5.
M5 at full power.
Let's do the announcements, M5.
Announcements displayed.
The Trek Profiles Podcast is an independent show. If you'd like to support us, the best way that you can do that is to subscribe via your preferred podcasting platform. We are on all the places and would appreciate you following us there because that's what enables other Star Trek fans to find us. There are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode. They will come after the ending audio cards. You may enjoy them or not, as you choose. A brief technical notice, this was the last recording I did with my old audio setup, my old microphone, my old mixer, and all of that. So you will be hearing a new sound coming from the Trek Profiles podcast very soon. Let's do the lightning round feedback from episode 56 with Glenn Dakin. Mushrooms with Reno, or the green stuff with Scotty. Green and green, it was all green with my guest and all of you wanting the green stuff with Scotty. And the Twitter poll was 53 to 47%. You must battle to the death. Will it be Vulcan style with the Lirpa or Andorian style with the Ushan Tor? Lirpa was the choice of both my guest and the Twitter people by 53 to 47%. I'm surprised it was so close, but that was pretty awesome. You need medical care from Dr. Phlox in sickbay. He offers you two possible treatments. You can get either the Regulan bloodworms or the Eidosian slugs. Slugs were the order of the day for everyone, my Ferengi peeps, as my guest and most of you picked them by 62 to 38%. No love for the Regulans. Which runabout was best, the Ganges, the Yangtze Kiang, or the Rubicon? Now, Glenn picked the Yangtze Kiang, but all of you wanted the Rubicon, which got 50%. 30% was for the Yangtze Kiang, and the Ganges was bringing up the back by 20%. And finally, check out Kaminar or swing by Zahia. Glenn wanted to honor the Elder by a trip to Kaminar, but the Twitter people wanted to check out Zahia, and the total was 53 to 47%. Couple of reminders about my lightning round. After every episode drops, I ask those questions that I asked my guest out on Twitter as polls, and you can follow me there and weigh in and have your say on this episode's questions. And also, some of those questions, and maybe some of the ones in this episode, were contributed by listeners like you. So if you're interested in contributing a question for the show, you can email me, feedback@trekprofiles.com, or you can DM me on Twitter. And if you want to see sort of what I'm looking for, there's a thing up on my website if you're interested. If you want to know kind of what makes a really good Kobayashi Maru question, you can check that out. All right, that is going to do it for messages, communiques, news, and announcements. Let's move on. M5, let's run the intelligence profile for this guest, and let's start the show.
The M5 complies.
Her favorite character is Captain Pike, but she's also partial to that highly stressed Commodore Matt Decker. Her favorite ship is the Discovery, but she's a big Andorian fan too. Coming from Texas, North America, Earth, in Sector 001, it's Tongtong Boo, a.k.a. Captain Pikachu. Welcome, Boo, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Glad to be here. How are you?
I am doing super well. It is a great and glorious day. Anytime I get to talk to another Star Trek fan and record an episode of the podcast, it is literally one of my favorite things to do. So any day I get to do this is a good day. But the M5 is a harsh taskmaster, and he demands that I ask question one, which is, Boo, are you a Star Trek fan?
Of course.
And how did you come into your Star Trek fandom?
Well, my Star Trek story started with my arrival to the United States when I was about 9 years old. And I caught some random episodes of Voyager on its last season, I think when it was on UPN, just scrolling through the TV at night. And I saw this show with spaceships and captains and all sorts of cool things. I thought, oh, well, this is quite neat. It's called Star Trek. I have no idea what that is. Didn't really speak English at the time. So it was all very just cool pictures and all sorts of funny things and cool aliens. And I like that. And so I kept watching. And then eventually I got into Enterprise, which was kind of my gateway into Star Trek.
So this was an original broadcast Voyager.
Yeah, I think so, but it might also be reruns. To be honest, I don't even remember what the episode was. I saw so many things out of order. I can't even remember what half of them are anymore.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I talked to so many Star Trek fans or people who are wanting to get into Star Trek, and they're like, okay, where do I start? And what order do I watch things? And I was like, you know what? I have talked to so many people who just like literally started in the middle of some random season. I don't think it actually matters. I know that a lot of people would take me to task for that, but I just don't think it matters anymore. You just pick a show and start watching it from wherever. And if you like it, keep watching it. If not, turn it off and try a different one.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that works perfectly well. It did for me. So
you started with a little bit of random Voyager, and then you experienced Enterprise as it was in original broadcast.
Yeah, that was pretty exciting.
And did you watch Enterprise straight through and then go back to other shows, or how did you decide what to do next?
Yeah, I basically was watching Enterprise, and I think probably somewhere around like season 1 or 2 or something. I remember reading something about, oh, there's other Star Trek shows, and I was like, oh, cool. So I should probably go watch them too. So, I think I probably found like some old VHS tapes somewhere, or just like found some regular like old reruns that just like happened to be airing. So everything I saw was just like completely out of order. It might be like one day I was watching DS9 and the other day I was watching TNG. So it was sort of like all over the place. And I was like, well, this could be quite fun. I'll just keep watching. I'll figure it out.
And so it sounds like you're from an immigrant family. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so this was your thing. Like you didn't have like siblings or parents who were watching it with you, or was it just you?
No. Yeah, it was just me. My little brother was not born at the time when I started watching Star Trek, so it was just it was a me thing, and I would just kind of like turn on the TV and watch sort of thing. And I was at that time where I was like learning new languages and like try to figure out how things were. So my folks were just kind of like, oh, well, she wants to sit in front of the TV and look at weird stuff, then yeah, sure, whatever. And it was the most effective way for me to also just learn English, because just like watching stuff and like soaking everything in like a sponge. And it was just, I pretty much learned how to speak English from just watching TV and like trying to mimic people speaking. And
that's so amazing.
And like I essentially learned English fluently in about like 6 months just from watching television.
It's amazing to me that it's amazing to me that you can learn English by learning such amazing lines as align the chronoton particle emitters.
Yeah, I mean, come to think of it, that's probably why, like, when I watch like the rest of TV, I'm just like, no matter how crazy something sounds, I'm like, oh, that sounds reasonable to me. It's just because my baseline was like Star Trek and science fiction, and it was just like, well, yeah, everything sounds normal. Like when you grow up watching like Stargate, Star Trek, Power Rangers, like everything is like weird techno-babos anywhere. It's like made up language that half of it doesn't even make sense to normal people, much less somebody who didn't even speak English when it happens.
Oh, that's amazing and glorious. I think that's probably something that I think the writers of Star Trek never conceived, that other people might be learning English by trying to figure out and how to deconstruct all that stuff that ended up in the episode, because the writers never wrote that stuff. They would just write tech the tech, like that's the words that were in the script, and it would go to some science consultant who would like put in the technobabble. So that's amazing that the technobabble was helpful to you. I think that's glorious.
Not what they thought when they wrote Star Trek was, oh yeah, somebody's gonna learn how to speak English from all of this.
That's great. Well, my father-in-law, he learned English by watching hockey games. So you can sort of figure that out. I don't know. That might explain a lot about my wife's family. So I don't know. So is this still like a you thing, or has your family gotten on board the Star Trek bus?
Well, I've certainly tried to. My mother, she's not very much of a TV watching sort of person. And getting her to watch pretty much anything is kind of difficult. So, but my dad, he likes to watch TV, and he's seen all the J.J. Abrams, the Kelvin timeline films, because we used to go to theaters and just kind of like, watch all the stuff. And he quite enjoys Picard. He kind of picked up Picard while I was off in law school. Mm-hmm. So that was quite exciting. I was like, oh, we have a, similar talking point for Star Trek. I think I tried to get him to watch Discovery, but he was like, he just kept falling asleep watching it. And I think it has something to do with, I think Discovery had a bit more technobabble than Picard did. And Picard was very much like kind of earth-based, grounded sort of story. And Discovery was kind of more fantastical. And so the science-y stuff and the technobabble, I think there was a lot of speaking. So his head was probably doing like extra seconds of translations. So he just like overworked his brain a little.
Oh, wow.
But I introduced my little brother over, I think it was like 2 years ago. He came over to visit me for the summer. And we were just like, there was really nothing to do. So I was like, yeah, we're just going to sit down and watch Discovery then. And so he really loves Discovery. He quite enjoys it. And he's quite excited for all the new seasons. We're still trying to catch him up because he's been doing school stuff. But yeah, we're trying to get him to catch up to season 3 of Discovery. That's been really exciting to kind of like have somebody to share it with and kind of see all the cool stuff. And he's seen the Kelvin timeline films as well, but he was quite young when he saw them. So he's kind of got like a half-baked memory of like how things were. So he has sort of a strange, like almost like osmosis understanding of Star Trek from like seeing it when he was younger, but he's never kind of like comprehended Star Trek. So it was kind of cool to like have him watch Discovery and kind of like see sort of a modern take on Star Trek that's not kind of like I think the older shows were a little harder. I try to introduce him to some of the older stuff, but it's a little harder for him to kind of grasp. So I was like, yeah, we'll just let him see the new stuff. That's exciting. And when he's a little older, he can go back and find all the cool stuff for the older ones.
Very well. That's the thing. I mean, there's so much Star Trek out there that there's really different versions of it that can appeal to different people, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the great things about the show that makes it so powerful in a lot of ways. And it's okay to like a certain part and not like other parts, and find the part that you like, which I think is great.
Yeah, I mean, that's the fun of it, having all the variety.
I put something on Twitter the other day that I have this problem where I can't even tell what I'm more excited about. It's like, I was like, I feel the same way about when I put on an older episode as the new stuff. Like, I am no less excited to rewatch an old episode than I am for the new stuff. I know that might sound weird to people, but just putting in any old episode, I'm just as excited to watch it as I am for new episodes. I love it all. And I can't really intermediate for myself like what I like best. I don't even know anymore because it's too much for my small brain to handle.
I totally get you. I mean, like when I watch old Trek episodes, it's like it feels like I'm watching it with like the first time.
Yeah.
Which I guess in a strange way it kind of is, because I saw it when I was younger, and it was such like it felt like a lifetime ago when I watched it. And I was like in such a different place. So watching it again having basically like no memory sometimes of like the older episodes. It's kind of like just watching it entirely new and be like, oh wow, so that's what's in that episode. I just completely forgot half of it. And it's so interesting because it feels like I feel like I have like there's two versions of me that's seeing Star Trek. One that's the 12-year-old who like found every single Star Trek episode and watched all of them. And then there's the like, the nearly 30-year-old version of me watching Star Trek. And it's just like, it's like two completely points of view of like how I feel about Star Trek when I was little and to like how I feel about Star Trek now as a grown-up. It's just like two wildly different things. Like it's so strange when I think about it because it was like I'll watch an episode and be like, that's not how I thought about this episode when I was 12. Like there were things that I just like never realized was there. And it's so cool because it just feels like watching it new.
It's I guess then the idea of the Kurlan Naskos must be true. Right, that we have all this chorus inside us, right? That we have all these little different people, right? Which I think is great. So there you go. It shows you about the timelessness of Star Trek. Have you felt compelled to collect anything in your Star Trek fandom, even DVDs, Blu-rays, or anything like that?
I have some DVDs. I think from the Calvin Timeline movies. I think I have Into Darkness. I don't know if I have 2009. But I have a couple of pins and some stickers and some T-shirts, one of which I'm wearing right now. And I got the little welcoming package that CBS had sent out for Lower Decks when it was premiering. So
nice.
That was cool. They sent like a kind of like a drink mixer thing with a bunch of popcorn and everything, which was pretty cool. I appreciated it.
Oh, that's glorious. That's glorious. Yeah, I actually saw that. People were posting those on Twitter. I'm not important enough to get on that list. So congratulations for you. I think that's wonderful. So anything else? Are you on the lookout to acquire anything? Is your inner Ferengi coming out and saying, must have, must acquire?
Yes, certainly.
Ooh, tell me.
I would like more Funko Pops to add to my current Funko Pop collection. Okay. Which just continuously grows. So I'm hoping to get the Michael Burnham and the Saru Funko Pops. And maybe some of the Star Trek Beyond ones as well. And I've been keeping my eye on this Andorian Funko Pop that I'm hoping to eventually get. I'm hoping to get like one of those like Enterprise pizza cutters. Even though we don't really eat pizza in the house, but I was just like, I want to have one just because I feel like it. And what else would I? Oh yeah, eventually when I move and get to my own place, I would like to have this really cool. I think it's like the Hero Collector bust of Captain Pike, the Anson Mount Captain Pike. I would like to have one of those busts to display in my house.
Nice. Very good. So you've got your acquisitions all laid out, right? You've got the runway laid out in front of you.
Exactly. There's future acquisitions on the way.
Glorious. Have you ever been to a convention, Sci-Fi or Star Trek, either one?
So not a Star Trek convention, but I have been to quite a couple of Supernatural conventions.
Okay. So is that another fandom in which you are a participant?
Yeah, quite a few years ago, I was quite a big fan of Supernatural. So I went to their conventions when I was living in LA for a couple of years. That was always really fun.
There's like an incredible number of hours of that show. I know nothing about it except that there's a huge amount of it. And there's apparently two guys on the show that divided the fandom on whether or not you ship them, I guess. I don't know. That's all I know about it. I have no other knowledge. So
you would probably be safe just knowing that.
Okay.
Anything more would be very, very complicated.
Okay, very good. Very good. So would you say that Star Trek was your first fandom and then you sort of got into these other things, or was it concurrent with something else?
I would say Pokemon was probably my first fandom as a kid.
Okay.
Because even in China, Pokemon was quite popular. And at the same time, I was also a big fan of the series Ultraman. And
Okay, I don't know that one. Okay.
it's a very pretty popular Japanese sort of live action sort of sci-fi story. It's kind of like it's sort of an ultra alien, giant alien that fights like other monsters and stuff. Quite cool, quite exciting. And then
Sounds cool.
When I got to the U.S., my first fandom is probably Power Rangers.
All right. And which was your favorite?
I started out with Time Force, so that was always kind of a very special place for me. I actually got to meet the actor who played the Time Force Red Ranger at one of the conventions in LA, and that was super cool. I totally cried. It was very emotional.
No shame in that. Mm-mm.
It was just very cool. Like it was one of those things that like, because I remember very distinctly as a little kid watching Power Rangers and then like going to the bathroom to pretend I was a Power Ranger and like try to like imitate the dialogue and stuff. And so that was one of the things, along with Star Trek and some of the other things, that helped me figure out how English works. So.
Oh, that's glorious. But it seems like you're still very much in the Pokemon fandom, it seems to me.
Yeah, that is very eternal.
Did you catch them all?
Probably not catch them all, but close enough sometimes.
How many cards do you have? It's just between us. How many cards do you have? It'll be our secret.
2 binders of Pokemon cards that's sat somewhere in the office downstairs.
So you've been to some supernatural conventions, but no Star Trek as of yet.
No, unfortunately not yet, but hopefully soon.
Oh, you planning on any?
Not at the moment, but hopefully if one of those Star Trek missions move to Texas, then I might consider going in the future.
Glorious. Have you ever put on a Star Trek cosplay?
No, I've never really done any cosplay, but it would certainly be fun to try. I would like to one day get one of those, uniforms. It would be quite nice.
What uniform, if you could have your pick of any uniform from any iteration of Star Trek, what would it be?
I would probably say either the Enterprise era uniforms or the Discovery ones.
You got to pick. There can only be one.
Probably Enterprise.
So the jumper?
They look just much more comfortable and functional, to be honest.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And
I think they got pockets too, so
pockets and zippers. So many zippers.
Like, I love pockets. I love pockets and zippers, so it's kind of my thing.
So I have to ask. I follow you on Twitter. And I noticed that you are a prolific, and I say this with respect, but I really want to just get to the truth of this here. You are a prolific subtweeter. What is going on there, Boo? I look at your tweet, and it's like all like people are saying this, and then you respond to it, and people are saying that, and you respond to it. Like it's all subtweets. What is going on with the subtweeting? I'm fascinated by internet culture. And I'm fascinated on how people use these social media platforms. I'm not sure I figured anything out yet. I'm just a fellow traveler here, but I'm curious as to what's going on with the subtweeting.
Well, it's like having a conversation, just across the time-space continuum. It's like a long-distance hail towards somebody. And sometimes it's just sometimes it's fun conversation, and sometimes it's kind of calling out people who are spewing some BS that
sure
perhaps needs to be called out. And other times it's just, commenting on sort of fun things that happen in the world.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I my whole thing is I have a show account, right? It's not really a personal account.
Yeah.
It's a show account. So for me, my whole thing is like, I'm going to be entertaining, right? I try to be funny is all I really do. And I just try to, talk a lot about Star Trek and some other funny pop culture fandom things and try to amuse people. So I don't really get into any of the social media spats that happen or any of that kind of stuff. It's just doesn't interest me. But I'm really interested in how people use social media. And one of the things that I find really interesting is, especially with Twitter, is that it's a public platform, but then people try to use it like a private tool in a lot of ways. And like they're like, oh well, I'm putting these things out publicly, but I only want like certain people to respond, or like I want to limit like my tweets to like a private conversation. But it's like you can text the person, or you can do like other things. Like I don't know. I don't have any answers here. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong. I don't really understand it myself, and I'm still trying to figure all this out. It's just very strange to me.
Yeah, it's Twitter is sort of like almost a public-private place. You know, it's a very strange thing because it's public, like you say. You know, you're on a public platform, anybody can see you, but then also, you know, sometimes you can make your account private to only a few groups of people. You know, you can make your tweets private to certain people only. You can, you know, close off replies to certain groups of people. You know, there are upsides and downsides to it, but I think, you know, I think it's people like to, you know, speak things out into the universe and feel like somebody is listening. But at the same time, you also don't want the wrong sort of crowd to like come in and kind of ruin the point that you're trying to make. So it's definitely a line to straddle sometimes. You know, sometimes you just gotta block the noises out, and then the other time, you know, some conversations are, I think, important to have, and other ones, you know, you just gotta pick your battles sometimes.
I completely agree with that. I mean, one of the questions I often ask myself, especially when I see people getting dragged into any kind of spat or anything where the temperature is getting high, is, and this is for any of the people on any of the sides of the discussion, I say, what is your goal in engaging in this discussion? Like, what is your highest and best outcome here? Right? Are you trying to change the other person's mind on something? Because if you're trying to change the other person's mind, whatever you're doing is not helping. or is it you're trying to talk to people who already believe in you and using that other person as just a prop to argue against? You know, sometimes people, I think, do that. And I don't know in any particular cases. I'm just saying I think that's a tendency that sometimes people have, and so that's why I never get involved in these things. But I'm just always fascinated to follow along with this stuff and to see which way it goes. It's really interesting to me.
It's quite fun sometimes.
It is, and that's the great thing. I mean, I'll never forget. Like I saw a news article, and this is probably 2 years ago as we record this, where a person in Canada somewhere, might have been Ontario, I don't recall exactly, but they had like a 14-foot model of the Enterprise sitting on their lawn with a sign saying, you know, for sale, call this number. And I mean, a 14-foot model. That's enormous. Like, first of all, where would this person even get such a thing, right? And I remember when I tweeted that, and I think it was the most retweeted I ever got. Was that. I mean, it was like, you know, tens of thousands of retweets. It was unbelievable, right? And it actually turned out that was from a movie theater that had it hanging from the overhead. and people were just it's just amazing to me how all this stuff just takes off, and it can be so fun, you know, and people were just commenting and cracking jokes and having a good time, which I loved, you know, and it's
a fun way of communicating with sort of like everybody around the world. Because I think, you know, sometimes people don't want to use like private communications, and so like Twitter is kind of this fun place where people don't have to, I think, sometimes put in as much and to just kind of like interact with sort of everybody around without having to be like, you know, you got to call people and you got to like do more like personal stuff, and it's just kind of like a cool place for everybody to hang out together.
Now that I think about it, I don't know if there's any people that I know outside of Star Trek that actually follow me on Twitter. I think it's all Star Trek people. Like, I don't know anybody, like in my personal life, like regular people I know. I have to think about this. There may not be any. I don't know. If you're out there and you're listening to this, let me know. Okay, let's move on. So what is up with this weird fusion you have of Pikachu and Pike? What's going on there as like your internet persona and avatar? Explain yourself, Boo.
Well, this started with well, actually, I mean, you can blame Anson Mount for this.
Sure.
Because he's the one doing it. As I was watching season 2 of Discovery, I noticed that there were numerous amounts of facial expressions that he was making that was very much identical to Detective Pikachu, which was coming out at the same time. And so I just started like putting pictures and stuff together that I was like, these are literally the same people. Like I'm pretty convinced now.
I love it. I love it.
I'm pretty convinced now that Anson Mount must have been like doing motion capture for Detective Pikachu. She was doing so many Pikachu expressions that I just started like compiling like side by side images throughout the entire season until like I had like numerous different. I could probably send you pictures, like numerous just moments where like he literally just matches the Pikachu in expression. And so out of that, I was like, okay, I'm convinced now that, you know, he's a Pikachu. So at some point, it just became, I was like, Pikachu. Oh, wait, the last name is Pike. It starts with a P, so it's Pikachu. And so that's kind of where that came from. And as soon as it started, it just kind of became this thing. And then Anson Mount posted one of my images on his Instagram, and so it just kind of became a thing. And I was like, well, you know, at least he's accepting his destiny as a Pikachu. So
glorious. So send me a couple of those, and send me a couple of your best ones, and I will post those over on the show notes page at checkprofiles.com. I think my listeners will enjoy that very much.
There's a compilation. and it was also kind of born out of this very strange thing that I noticed in season 2 storyline, where I'm pretty convinced that somebody on the staff of Discovery must be a Pokemon fan, because the story of Pike and Ash Tyler, sort of their interactions with each other, was almost identical to the beginnings of the Pokemon anime, which is the Pokemon trainer Ash Ketchum and his Pikachu had the same sort of relationship. And so I was convinced that Pike, Pikachu, and then Ash and Ash Tyler, I was like, somebody must have been watching like Pokemon anime before they wrote this storyline, because this is literally identical storyline happening. So
you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it here first. It all came from Pokemon. So there we go. We've solved the mystery of Star Trek Discovery. I love it. I think that's just fantastic. Okay, so then I have to ask, what is this obsession with OSHA? I love it. I love it. We've had some good laughs about it, and I just want to say for my international listeners, of which I have more than a few, OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration here in the United States. These are the people who will go into like a factory and make sure that you have guardrails on the proper places and safety tape on the stairs and all that kind of stuff. And make sure that like the people who are doing typing don't get carpal tunnel syndrome and all those kinds of things. So, are you like an OSHA safety inspector or something? What's going on here?
No, despite what might be some people's confusion sometimes, there was genuinely people on the internet that thought I was an OSHA inspector. In fact, one person very angrily tweeted at me a couple of years ago as if I was an OSHA inspector, which I was not. But it all really started, I think, to be fair, I think it all started with Star Wars, because Star Wars has no like safety rails anywhere, and I used to play Star Wars: The Old Republic, and I would fall off elevators all the time. So it became a slight frustration for me that there were no safety rails anywhere. And then at some point, as a kid watching Star Trek, I was noticing that, you know, people just didn't really exercise much common sense. And so, you know, even my young adolescent self was like, well, I would never do such a thing like that. Why are these grown-ups doing these crazy things that, you know, I, as a child, knows to never do? You know, like, don't poke at things that you don't know what they are. don't, eat strange alien food. And, don't, learn how to blend in really well. All sorts of things that I would have thought that, a scientific explorer would know. And I think it was just it was born out of this like sort of confusion of me wondering why were grown adults doing things that my mother had informed me since I was 5 years old to not do. So it was a very confusing time. And then at some point, as I was interacting with people online, it just sort of became this thing where I was like, there's so many OSHA problems in Starfleet that I can't. And as I was like rewatching episodes, it just became more and more readily apparent that there is no OSHA in Starfleet, or else half the problems that happens on starships wouldn't happen. Your captains wouldn't be, cartwheeling across the bridge, or hitting view screens, or falling all over the place, or hitting their head somewhere. It just seemed like it was very unsafe. and at some point it just became a thing for me that I was like, okay, we have a problem. We have to point this out. At some point they've got to fix it. And it just it was very it was very funny because, and I think the genesis of that probably started in Star Trek with, being a fan of Captain Pike and watching the Menagerie and just wondering why was it that they gave him a beat machine but couldn't bother to give him a Morse code machine, which I was convinced that surely in the 23rd century somebody would have realized Morse code would be more effective than giving somebody one or two beats. And at some point it was just,
at the very least, they did wear safety glasses when they were shooting the entrance to the underground caverns.
I mean, occasionally they get some things right, but that's like, 1 out of 2,000 other things that they've done wrong. And I still don't know why they don't have seatbelts, and this is one of the things that I think the Kelvin timeline films made it all the more obvious, because the Kelvin timeline, for some reason, decided to be more aware of, basic safety concerns. And I don't know if it's because, they kind of got their butts handed to them with Nero and the Narada attacking the Kelvin. So at some point they were like, oh yeah, OSHA might be important for all of us. So, maybe this is the problem. Maybe Nero is the reason that we have OSHA in the Kelvin timeline, but not in the Prime timeline. So I don't know. Maybe we need like some big attack or something to make Starfleet realize having seatbelts and other things might be a good thing to have. Although, some people that's a part of Starfleet, like, Captain Rios on La Serena, seems to understand the importance of handrails and seatbelts. So there's at least one person in the entire Star Trek universe that seems to grasp the concept that these things are important. So
very fair. Well, then again, his ship is a civilian ship, so maybe like Starfleet doesn't mess with any of that stuff, right? Maybe the civilian ships have that. I don't know. But to quote a Star Trek episode, the time has come for total truth between us. Boo. So I was doing some gentle internet research and some gentle internet sleuthing, as I am wont to do before recording with any person, and I came across a fanfic where someone had written a fanfic that was a series of Federation news articles about the trial of engineer Leah Brahms for her gross incompetence in assembling the warp core for the Enterprise and the Galaxy-class starships because it was so fragile, the warp ejector system never worked, right? And the fanfic was written as a series of news articles following her trial for gross incompetence as an engineer. Was that you who wrote that?
Unfortunately, I cannot claim to have written such a brilliant story. And now I feel really bad that I didn't go and write those things. Now I'm going to have to go write it after this.
The fanfic world is wild, Boo. It's wild.
I am a reader. I am a fanfic writer. I have my own original characters and the whole shebang. You probably noticed that I've made some posts to some of those characters. So yeah, fanfics are great. I hope that, I mean, I just hope that one day maybe we get a Star Trek OSHA show at some point. You know, I would like to see the adventure of some, you know, lonely OSHA inspector in Starfleet trying to keep the Federation afloat and not doom the entire future, you know, by at least trying to give them some common sense, because most of the time they feel like, you know, they never learn, you know, the stranger danger part of life that we all understand.
So if I could find the link to that fanfic, because I didn't keep the link, but if I can dig it up again, I will put that on the show notes page so people can go check that out, because it's wild.
Yes, that'd be amazing.
It's wild. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and also a lot to think about too if you're designing for safety. Okay,
definitely.
I think we should dive into some episodes. Are you game?
Yeah, totally.
All right, let's start with well, heck, let's talk about Captain Pike. Let's talk about Through the Valley of Shadows, and that's Star Trek Discovery Season 2, Episode 12. And this is the one, of course, where we go to Boreth and Pike goes down and meets Tenavik and all of that. My question for you, Boo, is why does this episode resonate with you?
I think it resonates with me because one of the things that I remember very distinctly as a little kid was very curious about what happened with Captain Pike, you know, the journey that let him, you know, this whole story of him going to save the cadets. And it was always one of those things that, you know, I imagined it in my head, and I remember reading the old comics that showed some of that stuff, but I'd never seen it. And I remember before Discovery Season 2 had even premiered, I had a prediction in one of the Discord server chats of, yeah, I think we're going to have Pike see his future. I think that's what we're going to get in Discovery Season 2. And so lo and behold, comes Through the Valley of Shadows. And that's exactly what prediction ended up coming true. And I think what resonated with me especially was the fact that what happened with Pike wasn't an accident. Mm-hmm. That it was something that he chose to do. And it was something that he didn't just choose once to do. And it was something that basically from that moment forward to the day he steps into that engineering room to save the cadets, it's something that basically he had to wake up every day choosing that I'm still going to do this. I'm still going to go forward with it. So it was one of those stories where, like, I had already loved Pike and this whole idea of he's just this self-sacrificing hero. Mm-hmm. And then to add on top of that, to say, oh yeah, in the next, 7-8 years for the rest of his life, he's just been preparing for that moment and saying every day, okay, I'm going to still do this. I'm going to still do this. I'm still going to walk into that engineering room and get all those cadet out as much as I can. And there's just something about, like, bravery in the face of sort of all that adversity, mm-hmm. and then making that choice still, and that sort of resilience. And I think that's what I really connected to, because resilience is something that is a trait that I gravitate towards, because I always feel like, whatever happens in the universe, I can get through it. So mm-hmm. when I have characters who are also resilient in that way, it really connects with me, and it kind of boosts my confidence in that aspect of, like, you know what, hey, you went through this crazy thing. Mm-hmm. Whatever happens with me, it's not the end of the universe. I can get through it. And so it was one of those things that it just felt like, and also just the fact that what happened to him wasn't this, tragic accident that he had no control over, or there's no agency, but rather they retroactively gave him agency to make the choices and saying, I could walk away from this. I could not do this. I could say, this is not my future. I'm going to go have something else. But he chose to do it anyways. And so, like, just characters having that agency and him making that choice, I thought it was just so important that it made that story like really come full circle. That, you know, the story that I loved since I was 9 years old, and now watching it and be like, all these years, they've made this story come full circle and ending it in such a perfect way to say, you know what, he made this choice a long time ago and he's still making it. And this is him walking towards his destiny with his head held high and not backing down from it. And it's just, I don't know, it's just, there's something really inspiring about it. And it just kind of makes you like want to go out into the world and be like, you know what, nothing can stop me from doing, you know, the things I want to do. It's just really cool. Like it's so cool. I love it.
It's an inspirational message, but it also has an element of actual real life truth in it. One of the things that I've posted I've only posted a very little bit of this on Twitter, but I'm a pilot. And one of the things about learning to fly planes is it used to be that they stressed memorizing some of the checklists, like especially the casualty checklists, like what to do in case of an engine out, what to do in case of this, that, or the other thing. But the real way to train that stuff is not necessarily to have the checklist memorized, which is a good thing to do, but that's not the best way to train it. The best way to do it is to have scenario-based training so that when you're flying with the instructor and you've just taken off, which is a very dangerous moment in flight because you don't have any altitude and you're at high power and slow speed, it's very dangerous. And to know, like, when the instructor says the engine's out right now, where are we going to land? You already have to have thought through all of this and made your decisions. Like, it shouldn't be, oh gosh, what am I going to do? You have to know, right? That like when I'm taking off from this runway, where do I land if the engine goes out and I'm not at pattern altitude? Like I have to already be committed to know the things that I'm going to do. And in an emergency, and I even talk to people that work in safety and in law enforcement, and a lot of the training revolves around being in dangerous situations and understanding what the options are. Right. And being committed ahead of time that like, if this happens, I will do this, or when this happens, I will respond in this way, as opposed to just being in the moment and sort of going with the flow. And that's when people freeze up and bad things happen.
Right.
So it had a moment of resonance with me too. I'm curious though, as to how you feel about all the different iterations of Pike, because we have the 2009 variation of Pike. We have, of course, the OG Pike, Jeffrey Hunter. You've been talking a lot about Anson Mount. So you've talked a little bit about Jeffrey Hunter. So how do you feel about the 2009 Kelvin era Pike?
I mean, I think one of the things that I was really excited in the 2009 Star Trek was having Captain Pike back in the story. Because, you know, for the longest time, I was like, oh, you know, the Pike story is probably never going to happen. It's not going to be a thing that they're going to deal with. And then to know that in a big screen movie that they got Captain Pike back, and not only that, they got Bruce Greenwood to be Captain Pike, who, you know, he's a brilliant actor, has such a magnetic, you know, on-screen presence in basically like everything that he does. And it was so cool because I remember, you know, watching in the theater, and I'm like, Captain Pike is on the big screen. It was very, very exciting and emotional moment for me, because I was like, people are going to love this character and it's going to be great. And you know, I don't think we'd have Anson Mount's Pike if we didn't have the 2009 Pike with Bruce Greenwood, because I think that set the stage for them to feel like this is a character we can bring back and explore something new with it, because people love that version of the character in the 2009 story, and there's so much more to explore. So, you know, I think the different iterations of Pike is interesting because, you know, each actor kind of brings their own sort of story, kind of like presence to it. But you can also sort of tell where, what kind of roles they serve in the story that they're in, and also kind of the time period that they were written in, which is very interesting because, you know, with Jeffrey Hunter's Pike, he was sort of this, you know, run down and very exhausted and kind of grumpy sort of character.
Exhausted and haunted is the way I think about it. Yeah.
And you know, and Jeffrey Hunter is like really good at giving that like brooding sort of like darker tone to that character. And and I feel like, it's interesting because, that Pike is obviously the earliest iteration of Pike. And I feel like that's kind of like when you're at that age where you're kind of like, you're young and you feel sort of self-important. And then everything is really doom and gloom when you're young. You're like, everything is sort of the end of the world. And like, you do one thing and you're like, oh my God, I'm so exhausted. I never want to do something like that again. And I feel like you go through something, and then from that, he kind of like mellows a bit out with age, and you kind of see that as he evolves into like Anson Mount's Pike, who is more jovial. Like, he still has that little dark edge to him that's part of the Jeffrey Hunter's Pike. Like, sometimes it sneaks through in some of his performances very subtly. That like he at certain points, the way he like would tilt his head or the way his tone of voice would come across is almost identical to like Jeffrey Hunter and like certain tones that he would use. And that was always very fascinating because there's like very specific moments you can sort of still see that, TOS era Pike coming through. But like, clearly this was written in, modern, 2019, 2018 times, where, this character is not the kind of character you'd have in the 60s, and it's kind of like the 60s Pike, we always talk about like there's certain lines that they give him is just kind of really awkward and obviously really sexist. But like, this Pike is obviously more modern and sort of more jovial and more very in tune with his crew and their needs. And he's a very empathetic leader and sort of this very powerful yet very like healthy version of masculinity, where you don't have to command with an ego. Like, one of the things that I thought was really cool in this iteration of Pike was just that, like, he's not too attached to that chair. Like, he's not like, I got to be the leader, I got to make all the decisions, which kind of tends to be how all captains sort of are. Like, they got to be the one to be in charge. And Pike was very like, he's kind of cool if somebody wants to make the decisions a little bit. Like, he's always there to kind of like push them into the right direction, but he's also like not overly attached to that chair to be like, no, nobody can take that chair, it's only me. And so it's one of those things where like you kind of feel like you kind of see the different eras of Pike as representative, like, what kind of leader are we looking for sort of in the world? In the 60s, like, I feel like, like the sort of like down on your lugs or a leader, like, it feels like, at that time people were tired. Maybe your leaders are kind of reflecting that. And then in the 2009 era, I think, with especially Bruce Greenwood's Pike, he was that very fatherly figure. And I think, with everything that was going on during that time period, I think we needed kind of that comfort and kind of like, I think we all felt a little bit lost too. And Star Trek at that point certainly felt a bit lost. And so it was kind of cool to have sort of.
Did we need a Pike for all seasons?
Oh yeah, I would agree. I could put Captain Pike on all the shows and all the seasons. Definitely.
Well, then let's just talk for a minute about Strange New Worlds, which, as we record this, we know very little about, except that it's supposed to be more episodic. As a big Captain Pike fan, what are the things that you're hoping for in that show that if they deliver on it, you're just going to go, man, they are just killing it. They are slaying right now. What are you hoping for?
Well, I'm hoping for a horse to appear. And that's honestly that's like my number one dream, honestly, is just, I need Anson Mount on a horse. You give that to me in the first season of Strange New Worlds, I am satisfied. I am more than satisfied.
That sounds like a very low bar of success. I was expecting more.
I don't even need the story. I'm ready for any story they want to tell me. Like, I'm so ready for them to just, like, I don't even think I have any expectations. I just want to know more about these characters. I want them, I don't want to like have my expectations of what this show should be. I want them to like tell me what this show is. And honestly, the only thing I want is just, please put Anson Mount on a horse. That's really like my dream. Or have him discover a planet filled with Pikachu. That works too. It's two dreams. that
The crossover episode we all need.
Exactly. I mean, the Lower Decks already decided that there is a planet, there's a system called the Galar system, which matches to Pokemon having a Galar region. So, I'm fully expecting at some point Captain Pike to discover a Pikachu, maybe in like season 7 or season 8, somewhere at the end. But I mean, like, I think what I really want Strange New Worlds to be is not so much like specific storylines that I want them to do, but more, I just want to know the characters. I want them to tell these character stories where I can know more about these different relationships and how they impact each other and how they grow, and get the sense of like, what was that period of time that we're missing, like what is that Spock and Pike relationship really like, when they're in their stories, and what is the story with number 1, and what is her backstory, what is that relationship like, because we never seen any of that, and like it's kind of been there in the comics and in the novels, but like here's a chance to like really break new grounds and tell new stories and have us look at these characters in a different way. And one of the things that I love about telling these new stories and new Star Trek shows is how it makes me look at different episodes of older Trek shows in completely new lights. And that's kind of what I want Strange New Worlds to do in a sense, but I also just want them to like show me new stuff. It's a show called Strange New Worlds. Let's look at new worlds. Let's look at new aliens. Give me wacky, crazy, tentacle looking aliens or whatever. We have special effects now. I think we can do some of them. I just want them to like go out and have cool adventures, and and I'm excited about the episodic format because I think it gives them chances to tell different stories. But I think the thing for me was I always felt like those stories need to have like connected character beats. And so I one of the things that I was really encouraged from reading all the interviews was that, they made a point of saying, yes, it's episodic, but it's also the character stories are going to be serialized. Everybody's story is going to be like, we're not going to have something bad happen, in the one episode, and the next episode, everybody's forgotten it, they all have amnesia,
Harry Kim will be practicing his clarinet throughout the course of the season, right? That's the kind of stuff we're looking for.
Something like that.
Very good.
And it's just, I want these like connected stories. I want these characters to grow and have a journey. And how does Captain Pike deal with the fact that his fate is decided, like and like does it get to him sometimes? Does it affect missions sometimes? Is he more reckless than he already is? Does he jump on more phasers that he shouldn't be jumping on? I'm just very excited. The prospect of like this has been a show that I've wanted since I was 9 years old. So like it's this 20 long year dream of I just want to see more stories, like whatever those stories are, I'm completely open. There's certain things that I want. I would love to see Robert April. I would love to have that character in the story in some way, because I think, we've dropped enough little nuggets here and there that, it's time we meet the man who is the first captain of the Enterprise,
I think I saw somewhere online that a couple of people were hoping that would sort of be the first moment of Strange New Worlds, would be like the change of command ceremony in a flashback, right? From April cool. Turning it over to Pike, just like in a memory or a flashback or something like that, Yeah. I think it'd be great.
I mean, I think that would be really cool. There's also something that, there was rumors a while back that, they might have, Kirk somewhere appearing in the storyline. And I was trying to like think of like, I don't know, do I want Kirk in the story? But then I came up with this idea that I was like, wait, there is actually a way to bring Kirk into the story that would actually be really interesting, and actually like not only develop Pike's character, but April's character and Kirk's character at the same time. And it's born out of the novel Drastic Measures by Dayton Ward, where they talk about the fact that the Enterprise was there at the end of the whole massacre on Tarsus.
Right, Kodos the Executioner and all that.
Yeah, and so here I was thinking, Kirk in The Conscience of the King seems very settled and at peace with what happened on Tarsus. And what better way to kind of explore that story if in Strange New Worlds, let's say season 2 or season 3, once you establish sort of the main characters first, wouldn't it be really cool if we have a story where maybe something related to Tarsus comes up and you have Pike and April and Kirk all involved in that story in a way where maybe Kirk and Pike help. Maybe April and Pike help the younger Kirk kind of come to terms and have a peace, about what happened on Tarsus, and sort of all of them dealing with the trauma out of that, because they were there at the tail end of it. Obviously Kirk was there when it happened, but they're all sort of bounded by that story. And I just thought this would be a really cool way to explore a different side of these characters that we've never really seen, and explore the story that we've only gotten sort of one mention of in TOS, and also find a way to connect that with the younger Kirk to that older Kirk that we see, who's sort of at peace and sort of ready, and is not angry anymore about what happened on Tarsus, in the same way that all those other characters that were part of his survivors group, they were all pretty angry, and Kirk just seemed very chill about it. So I felt like that would be a really cool way to tie that storyline together while introducing these characters and sort of seeing different sides of them, because it would just, I like having these little nuggets that connect together, and it would just be great, because I love Drastic Measures as a book. So
it was a great book for sure. It was definitely a great book. Very disconcerting in a lot of ways, but I'd recommend it to any listeners out there to go check it out. I just want to register 2 of my own hopes for Strange New Worlds, which is, first, I want all about number 1. I want to know all about her. I want to know where she's going, what she's doing, what's happening, whatever spicy hamburger she's eating that day. I want to know all the things. I want to know all the things about number 1. And second, I hope that we do get some highlighting of the secondary characters. I don't want them excluded from the storytelling. So I hope not that it's going to be an ensemble show, but I hope that those secondary characters get some moments and some insights and some a little bit of love from the camera. And we don't even know that much about them yet, but I want them to get something.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think they have a pretty cool, interesting group of actors there. It would be a shame to not utilize some of them a bit more. And it seems like, from some of their tweets about their filming, it seems like they're very excited about whatever the story is going on. So, I'm very much looking forward to it. It's like having a long awaited dream. I'm like that moment from that old lady in Titanic was it's been 84 years. I've waited my entire life for this. So it's going to be so much fun when it happens. I'm probably going to cry. There's going to be a lot of tears, a lot of screaming. They could probably just put a 1-hour shot of just a ship floating around, and I would probably be like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
Well, we'll definitely be thinking of you if a horse appears in season 1 of Strange New Worlds, for sure. I'll be thinking of you. Absolutely. I know that I will. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about another episode. Let's talk about some TOS for a second. Let's talk about the Doomsday Machine, TOS, episode 6 of season 2. This is the one, of course, where we have that wonderful performance by William Wyndham as Commodore Matt Decker, commander of the Constellation, and the amazing Doomsday Machine itself. So why did this episode make the list, Boo? What's going on?
I mean, Matt Decker is my second most favorite Star Trek character of all time.
Amazing. Tell me why.
I always gravitate towards the background characters. Like, it's one of my habits. Like, at basically any show I watch, my favorite character is probably like background extra in number 48 or something like that. Like the most background character there could possibly be. I'm like, I love it. I love this character. I love this person. They are now my new favorites.
Right on.
And Matt Decker is just, he was just so interesting. Like, there was not, and I remember at the time you didn't really get many of those stories that were dealing with like trauma and PTSD and sort of like, what does it mean for a captain to lose his entire ship and survive? Like that huge amount of survivor's guilt. It was just, I remember I was kind of like blown away by it, because it was one of those things where, like, it's almost like watching the impossible happen. Because like Kirk is always like, oh, I'm gonna save the day and everything's gonna be cool, and then all the Star Trek shows are like the captain's always gonna save the day, and everybody's safe and everybody gets home at the end of the day, and everything's reset and it's happy, and and nothing's really bad happen. You lose a couple of red shirts here and there, but for the most part, everybody is okay. And this was like the few times, and maybe the only time really, that when I was watching TOS, that things didn't turn out okay. There's no happy ending. It's just your crew's gone, your ship is, you're just alone there. And like, what does that do to somebody who's a leader who cares about his people? It's like all these people, all these lives that you're responsible for, like 200 some odd people, and they're just gone. And you're there to kind of like, well, what the hell am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
And that's like, it's such a rough thing. And I remember watching that episode, and I just remember thinking, like, this man is just like, he's got it so rough. Like, it's really unfair. And you've got Kirk, who's always like, I don't believe in no-win scenarios. They always save the day and everything is cool. And I was just like, can you imagine if Kirk was in that place, that like for once he can't save his crew and there's no happy ending? Like, if he didn't have plot armor,
well,
he might be a Matt Decker.
But that's season 1 of Picard. That's all season 1 of Picard, right? The captain who always pulls a rabbit out of a hat, who always saves the day, who always makes it right, has an epic fail, and billions of people die, right? And now he has to live with that. That's what season 1 of Picard is.
Yeah, I mean, it's so, like, there's something about that. It just like was really powerful for me, because the characters that have to like go through that sort of thing is just, it's so interesting for me to watch. And it's just like, he's such a compelling character. And I just feel like really bad for him. I'm like, this poor man, like, he didn't really deserve all of this. Like, he didn't deserve any of it, but like, he's trying, and he's so caught up in that guilt and that anger that, he goes after this Doomsday Machine, and just like with everything he had. And I thought it was really, I didn't particularly think that some of the way they handle his PTSD, like reactions from the Enterprise crew, was kind of sometimes really awkward and blunt.
Yeah.
But that I was like, yeah, well, that was the 60s, so that's kind of how you did things back then. But I really like that, Kirk ended that story with like, he made sort of like the heroic sacrifice, and we're not gonna, say what really happened. We're gonna make sure that he gets remembered as a hero. And I thought that was really, really, really nice of him to do. And it's just, that character was just always so fascinating to me. And like, there's so many different stories that, as a fanfic writer, I was always, imagining like, what is the story of Matt Decker? Like, what was those years like? And then especially when Discovery had that list of like Starfleet's most decorated captains, like Matt Decker was on that list. And I was like, okay, so he's somewhere out there on the constellation right now. And, that's another thing. I would love to see them cast Matt Decker and have him appear in Strange New Worlds as well, just to like tie that into all those stories, because like what would be like here we've seen, Captain Pike in his prime as this great commanding officer.
Mhm.
What would it be to see Matt Decker at the height of his power and his, journey? That would be like having them side by side would be super cool.
One of the things I think about as I watch the episode is I like to put it in the context of the times. Having been made in the 60s, a lot of the men, and it was mostly men, who worked on the show were in fact veterans of World War II and possibly Korea,
Right.
and had exposure to a lot of scenarios that I think would be quite shocking to the mind and conscience of a lot of people today.
Yeah.
And given the strictures of the time, this was not talked about, right?
Right.
Like no one would go up to their friends and say, I have PTSD. Like that is not that term existed, but they wouldn't have said that, right? It just would have been something that you just sucked it up and lived with, right? And were possibly driven mad by, or had other suboptimal behaviors emerge in your life because you couldn't deal with it. And so I would think that a lot of people that were involved, or I don't know if a lot, but some number of the people involved in the show certainly had access to those experiences of, even if not personally, of knowing people that had those kinds of reactions. And so I think that informs a lot of how people interpreted the character in the day that might be very different from those of us who sit here in 2021 and look at it, right? We're coming from a very different perspective. And if anyone out there is listening to this, I just want to say one thing. If anyone out there listening to this has an interest, as we record this, it's middle of June 2021, and Dan Carlin is probably one of the most popular podcasters in the world. He has a podcast called Hardcore History. And he just released an episode on the very end of World War II, and he actually talks extensively about this and what some of these guys who were coming back from the island hopping campaign in the Pacific Theater and how they dealt with it, and also the other theater, which is the CBI theater, and particularly some of the things that were happening in India during the end of the war, and talks about some of those experiences. And it's really just a challenge to just listen to it. So I would encourage anybody to go check that out if you have an interest. I'm sorry I cut you off there. Please continue.
Oh no, that's great. I love learning about all the history stuff. Like that's just always really fascinating, and I think it's really important for people to learn. And I think even the story, watching it now in 2021, I think it's still it's a really good story. I think it holds up really well even now, of like the way they portray his character and what he's going through, and just like the sheer horror of like facing down something that would be like impossible to beat. And I have like a very tiny taste of that, trying to play that Doomsday Machine section of the mission in Star Trek Online, which took me days to try and figure out how to take out the Doomsday Machine. I was very frustrated, but so I can imagine some of his frustration in the episode. But yeah, I mean, it's just I think that was a really powerful story, and it was one of those things I think that is probably one of those early stories that introduced me to like the concept of like trauma and PTSD, because I think, watching some of the stories, like we didn't always get that kind of story. And so as a kid, it was like part of me learning about like, the world that's just beyond like, my little corner of the globe. And it was kind of really cool to like kind of see that story and have an understanding of like, what does trauma do to people, and what is it like, and how do you survive it, and how do you like deal with it. And it was very informative.
For sure. But I feel like we have to lighten it up a little bit, because this is getting a little too heavy for me. So I want to turn to something a little bit, I hope, lighter, and that's Lower Decks Veritas, Season 1, Episode 8. This is the one, of course, where our lower deckers are put onto this planet and they believe that they are on a trial of some kind and spill all kinds of dish about what goes on the USS Cerritos. So we haven't talked much about Lower Decks on Trek Profiles, so I'm glad to get the opportunity to do it. Why is this episode on the list? What is its significance for you, Boo? Tell me.
The significance for me is just, I think it's so genius. Like the way they structured this episode and the show is like they told these, like, I love these little vignette stories where like you told little mini stories inside a story, but you do it in such a way that it's so unique to each character. And so not only do you get these really cool and really fun stories, you also get to learn about the different characters in those stories. Like, how do they work? What is their point of view? How do they see the world? Because they all see it in such different ways, and it's just so brilliant. Like the episodes are only like 25 minutes, and they're able to like pack things into it that I think sometimes 45-minute long shows can't even do. And so it's so exciting to watch that story of like using the premise of like, oh, everybody's on trial to tell the story and then kind of subverting it at the end. But then also within the story, like everybody is just like their own points of view is just so funny, like like Rutherford is just like zoning in and out because of like the chip in his head, and Boimler being Boimler in his ways. And Tendi is just like, she just redacts really random things that like you're just like, you're not really redacting anything. Like at one point she's like Rom ... Mulan, and you're like, you didn't redact anything, you just kind of like did like pauses in between, and she would like, like on the screen they were like redact all the people's eyes and stuff, and it was just like, it was so genius because it's just like, it's so special in the way that all these characters look at the world so differently, and you see the way their personalities really shine in these stories. And I've like never found a Star Trek character that was exactly like me. And not until I saw Lower Decks and met Tendi. And Tendi and me are like just we're twins. We're the same kind of people, or like like everything in the world is exciting and everything's exciting, and we want to cool and see everything, and we maybe make a weird dog, all sorts of stuff. And so every time I see Tendi, especially when the character is like, are you really so stubborn as to risk death by eel? And she just kind of stands there and go like, yes, that's correct. And I was like, that's exactly how I would respond to that exact same question. And it's just, I had so much fun with that episode, just laughing. And it also just like showed me so much of these characters and the characters of like how they look at their bridge crew and the officers. And it's so much fun. Like I remember I just had so much fun in that episode, and seeing different parts of the world and how they explore the different lower deckers and like their journey in this ship of like sometimes you just don't know what's going on, nobody tells them anything. Sometimes you're just kind of wandering around like, oh no, this crazy thing's happening, but okay, sure, yeah, why not? Starfleet officers are adaptable. We can just go along with anything.
So now it's time for you to step up to the horn of candor and speak the truth. Tendi aside, who's your favorite lower decker in the show? Whether they're part of the bridge crew or the lower decks crew, anybody besides Tendi, who you've already talked about.
I think Mariner.
All right, very fair.
She's got that swashbuckling personality that I was just like, oh, we would have so much fun, but we will also create so much chaos together.
Well, good. I'm glad you wanted to talk about lower. I'm even wearing one of my lower decks t-shirts as we sit here today. So I think that's great. I'm glad it came up. All right, let's move on. I think we have to talk about some Enterprise, because you talked about how special Enterprise was for you, being one of the series, being the series that you were really first introduced to. So let's jump in and talk about the season 4 episode, Demons, and also Terra Prime, the follow-on to it. Why are these episodes on the list, and why are they special to you?
I think they're really special to me because I remember crying a lot during them. And it wasn't just because, oh, we're coming down to the end of the show, but it was just like, I was very emotional about that baby. I was very emotional about Trip and T'Pol. and also I was very emotional about the story that it was telling, because I mean, it was one of those things that I remember, like, I came into the country in 2001, and it was, a month later than 9/11 happened. And it was a very strange time for me, because, I was 10 years old, I was in this new country, suddenly this big thing happens. And I remember, seeing the plane go into the towers. And it was very strange, because in a sense, I understood something was happening, but then also I didn't really understand what was going on. And a lot of the fallout of that was also things that, like, I had a sense of. I remember things, but there was kind of like almost a strange, like, emotional distance, because I was 10 years old, and these were things that I, as a 10-year-old, you didn't really have the complexity and the nuance understood. And so as I got older, having Enterprise have these different storylines with the Zindi, and then with Terror Prime and Demons, it was like really like the first time for me grasping the idea of what is xenophobia. What is that level of discrimination and racism? And it's not that, like, I've never dealt with racism, but it's also like that's kind of on a slightly, like, different sort of level of racism, and it's almost like, terrorism and all that sort of stuff. And so it was almost like, in a way, Enterprise and these episodes were helping me grow up and understand how things were working in the real world that I had experience of, but couldn't have the emotional complexity to really understand the nuances of what was going on. And that story tied in with, Trip and T'Pol was just like, it was just lots of tears. I remember just crying a lot, because it was sort of the first time of really understanding and seeing, like, there are people in the world who do just hate you for whatever, reason. And, like 10-year-old me couldn't really understand that. But, like,
Sure.
13, 14-year-old me was starting to get the sense of, like, okay, so this is how the world is out there, and having that story was almost like introducing me to the issues that exist in the real world, that, issues that I would have to deal with growing older, and things that are even prevalent to, things that are happening now with, everything that's happened with COVID and the Asian hate that's going around. So it's one of those things that I keep coming back to, and just like rewatching and thinking, like, there's all these things I feel like we've been taught. Why is it that we're still not learning these lessons that has been sort of repeatedly told to us in Star Trek, that, there are things that we can do better on, and that, sometimes we don't really follow through on those things, that, at some point I always feel like, I keep hoping that the world would get better. And that maybe, we'd have a world where things are going to be great, and things are going to be, not have that kind of discrimination. And, that kids like the baby Elizabeth could be happy and grow up and, be in a better place. And it's just like all sorts of that emotion combined of, like, me growing up watching this story and kind of having a firsthand understanding through a fictional story of how to relate to those emotions in real life. And then now as an adult, rewatching it and seeing the story in a completely different way, now that knowing things that exist in the world. And, like, Star Trek is just kind of powerful in that way. When they do stories right, they really know how to just hit you really, really hard.
Yeah, for sure. It's a very powerful set of episodes, and it's also a really special story that you tell about your ability to access this episode based on your experience as an immigrant. And I want to thank you for sharing that. It's a very powerful way of thinking about these episodes. Let me ask you about another Enterprise episode. Let me ask you about the Andorian Incident. So a slightly different take, a very different focus for sure. We have the Vulcans and the Andorians basically getting into a tussle over P'Jem. So what's going on in this one?
I just love Shran. Shran is the
Shran,
greatest.
is it? You're Shran stan?
Oh, totally. 120%. So I love that character. I love that. I love the Andorians. I love that culture. I love that world. And just like something about the Andorians spoke to me, especially as a little kid. And I think it has to be with the way that they're always very headstrong and very, like set in their ways, and they'll fight and like honor, and like that was exactly my mindset at 10 years old. So I was like, I'm definitely an Andorian. So Andorians for me was like, I was like, at that point, as soon as I saw the Andorians, and I was like, if I was any sort of species in Star Trek, I would definitely be, I would be an Andorian, or I would be a human raised on Andoria. Like that would just
definitely cold adapted then.
Oh yeah. I grew up in a cold climate too as a kid in China, so that was like even more perfect. I was like, yes, these are my people.
See, and then you moved to Texas. That must have been quite a shock.
Yeah, I mean, there's a funny story of me arriving in Texas because, as a little kid, I was always growing up with stories of like, oh, America, the sunny place. It's all your cool, clear skies, blue skies, and rainbows. And I landed on the day where it was raining and cloudy, and I remember getting off the plane and just being very disappointed. I was like, this isn't what I was promised. Yes. I've seen rain my entire life. What is this?
I would like to speak to the manager of the weather, please.
Yeah, that was exactly my feeling. I was just like, I've had rain and cloudiness my entire life. What happened to the sunshine and clear skies that I was promised? This is not what I agreed to.
I don't know if you have any interest in hockey whatsoever, but as we record this, the Vegas Golden Knights are playing hockey against the Montreal Canadiens. And I was looking on some hockey forums because I follow my local team here. And a Vegas guy went into this Canadiens forum and he's like, hey, if any of you are coming down to any of the games in Vegas, I just want to warn you that it's going to be like 114 degrees this week. and if you've never been to Vegas, you are going to turn into a puddle on the sidewalk. So this is not exactly hockey weather. So prepare yourselves, right? Because it is going to be brutal.
Vegas can get really, really, really hot.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, when you get off the plane, that first experience can always sort of set the tone for how things are going to be, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was just cloudy, and I was disappointed, and then at some point everything cleared up, and it was just really hot, and I was like, oh, I did not prepare for this. I feel like the characters in Enterprise, we just kind of like jumped into something, and you were not prepared for like any of the things that followed. You just kind of like you just had to learn to deal with it, which was pretty much. I think the entire story of Star Trek Enterprise can be just like jumped into something and you weren't prepared and you just had to learn to deal with it.
Pretty well, that's what the show is, right? That's the premise of the show. There's no rule book yet, right? They're just figuring out as they go along.
It's the entire immigrant experience for me.
I think that's a glorious analogy that you made there, and I think it's quite apt, right? That's the whole point of the show. So as we sit here, Boo, we've been going for almost a couple hours, and we've been talking about Star Trek and why it has a particular resonance for you, especially with your immigrant story and you're growing up and seeing these characters that you admire. But I really just want to zero in on the encapsulation of why Star Trek matters to you as succinctly as we can. You've been on a lot of podcasts recently, I've noticed. You were on Weekly Trek recently. You've been on Jim Morehouse's show over Trek Ranks, glorious programs that people should definitely check out if they have an interest. So you've decided to really put yourself out there into the Star Trek fandom, coming on my show. We had some emails about this, that this show is about putting yourself out in the public as a Star Trek fan. spending these hours talking to me about it. Why does Star Trek matter to you?
It matters to me because I think it's that hope. It's the hope that everything is going to work out, that the future is going to be better, and that world that we all want, that's where everybody is happy and everybody is loved and protected, and everybody gets to have a voice, is the future that we can see happening. And I think that's always been the strength, and I think the uniqueness of Star Trek is not to say that things aren't going to be rough, that the utopia is not always going to be there, but that if we continue fighting, if we keep going, we're going to get there. And sometimes when we get there, we might take one step forward, two steps back, but it's the constant constant flow of hope. I think it's what Star Trek is really all about, is that you're never going to reach a place where like, oh, this is the perfect utopia, everything is done. But things could always go wrong, but you always have the hope that things will get better and that it will get better, and you're going to stand up and do something about it if it's not going the way that it should be. And that's, I feel like that's always been the through line of all the Star Trek shows, is that they don't settle for the world just being the way it is. That when things start to go wrong, our heroes stand up and say, hey, there's something wrong with our status quo. We can go off and we can do better. We can do the right thing and make the world better for everybody else. And I think it's that hope and the selflessness of that hope that I think is the most unique thing about Star Trek as a story and as a science fiction story, that I don't think a lot of other stories have.
Well, Boo, I've enjoyed our conversation, but I have to tell you that the M5 is signaling me that it is now time for the Kobayashi Maru lightning round.
Ooh.
The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our little program. Are you ready to face the Kobayashi Maru?
Always.
Very well. M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record Boo's responses.
Working.
Question 1. Buffer time with Boimler or small talk with Hutch?
Buffer time.
Hang out at the third Shap or hang out with Janeway's Warp 10 lizard babies?
Lizard babies.
Which new Star Trek series would you like to watch? Star Trek Gorn or Star Trek Morn?
Star Trek Gorn.
Which would be worse? An invasion by the Pac-led Armada a la Lower Decks, or an invasion of space Herberts a la The Way to Eden?
Pac-leds.
And finally, just for you, Boo, which safety violation is worse? The lack of a safety cage on the ops elevator in Deep Space Nine, or no 5-point harnesses or lap belts on most starships, or lack of a fall protection system on the platforms inside the Narada?
I think I have to go with the lap belts.
Lack of 5-point harnesses. Outstanding. Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing.
Right, Boo, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Tongtong is awarded the title of Safety Coordinator at the Utopia Planitia Shipyards.
So, there you go.
Am I going to have to be facing the blame for those robots going rogue? Because
that's it. You'll be number one on the witness list. That's it. Yeah, I might have done you no favors here. I'm sorry.
I wasn't there at work that day. I was on vacation. So.
That's right. I had the Rigelian flu. Boo, please tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want to continue the conversation.
Everybody can get in touch with me on Twitter at Captain Pikachu. That's Pikeachu, and I'll be there to scream about all things Star Trek and OSHA and Pokemon and Pikachu and Pike and everything to my heart.
Rue, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Glad to be here. It was really fun.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast, and before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your polite and friendly notes and suggestions, or threats to unleash your fleet of Doomsday Machines, or audio recordings of your Star Trek poetry slams to feedback@trekprofiles.com, on Facebook or Twitter @Trek Profiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be given to a giant space amoeba for space breakfast. This time, I leave you with a quote from Mariner, who in the episode Veritas said to Q, quote, "Okay, I'm not French. No, go find Picard." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
I'm not even going to put this in the episode, but I'll tell you that my kid was huge in Pokemon for a period of time. Then he got out of it, and he wanted to sell all of his Pokemon cards and buy like a gaming console, right? Mm-hmm. And then it turns out that like his, because he's 13, his 13-year-old little school girlfriend, she likes Pokemon. So now he's back into Pokemon, right? So now he's like playing Pokemon Go, and he's got to have all the cards again. And I was like, you sold all the cards. Oh my God. Anyway, I digress.
I mean, Pokemon cards right now are like a huge, like it's become a huge sort of mania sort of thing now, because for some reason it's kind of got back into popularity, and now like all the collectors and scalpers are like buying these different packs to like sell them and stuff. And so like there's packs that like I got very long time ago for like, like $2-3 or something, that are now like $70-80. So it's kind of really crazy that like now it's just like, if you have any old stuff, it might be like worth thousands of dollars. Like there was articles about like places like Target and Walmart that was like that was basically just like refusing to sell Pokemon cards because people were just like going crazy buying them and then like reselling them online and stuff. So the retailers were like, you can't, we're not selling Pokemon cards anymore.
And my wife's company, like everybody that she works with, they travel a lot internationally. So they know to always pick up a pack of Pokemon cards wherever they are and bring them back. So like, they literally
awesome.
So he's got like ones from Japan, Korea, from like Europe. I mean, all kinds of places, and they might not be worth anything, but it's just kind of cool that like he has all these international cards,
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
All right. That's all going in the bonus material. We are not going to burden our Star Trek fans with the Pokemon card discussion. Okay. Great job on your answers. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Do you remember Small Talk with Hutch? Do you remember that one?
I have a vague memory of it.
So there was this,
like not very clear.
There's this TNG episode where the Enterprise is pulling into some starbase for repairs or upgrades or whatever it is. And the commander of the starbase is this guy, Hutch, and he loves to just throw cocktail parties and have people come down. And he just wants to, I feel so bad for the guy because like he just wants to talk to people. Right? He just wants to talk to people, and I guess he's lonely out there on his star base and he doesn't have any friends. And like everyone's like, oh, I hate that guy. I don't want to be down there with him. I don't want to talk. I don't go to a stupid cocktail party, and everyone's just throwing a complete baby tantrum because they can't, they don't want to go talk to the guy. I feel bad for him. I think he gets a bad shake in the episode. So I always feel bad. I think he dies in the episode, if I remember right.
Oh no. I'm going to have to rewatch that episode. I hope he doesn't die.
Yeah, I think he
Really
does. And like
fast.
they get taken hostage by some generic bad guys. That's what it is. Like while the Enterprise is being repaired, the crew has to leave the ship. And so the whole command staff is hanging out at the cocktail party.
Always sort of there's always some sort of invasion by like everybody. I feel like the Starfleet is consistently being invaded by something.
Oh God, it's constant. You know, there's these things that you notice in Star Trek that like these tropes that when they show up, you're just like that again, you know? And it's like in Enterprise, like it's all the food scenes. Like they just, oh my God, like if someone is not stuffing their face any second, like in the show, they're like, we have to have a food scene. But the
I
one
think that might be why Enterprise resonated with me so much is that I love eating and I constantly see them eating, so it made me very happy.
Hey, very fair. Although the one that really gets me, and this is just my own personal thing, but how many scenes in like all of Star Trek begin with one character walking into a room with like a pad and saying, "Here's the results of the report." Right? And it kills me, especially like in Voyager or Enterprise, where email was already a thing. And you have these, like the people working on the show probably had email addresses, right? And you have people walking around. Like I remember this one where Neelix is walking around with the letters from home and he's got like 30 pads in a box. And he's walking around like, here's one for you and here's one for you. And I'm like, why is this even happening? Like, what is going on here right now?
Maybe like long distance email is just not working, you know?
It's just a thing, you know, even intra-ship, right? Neelix can't send a message. Now, I get it. The whole reason is like, they're like, we have to have a reason for one character to go to another character's working area or to their quarters. Like, I totally get it, right? But just, you know, sort of like critical me is always sitting there like, really, guys? Come on. Like, really?
I think one of the funniest thing that I read when it comes to just like the discrepancies between like older Star Trek shows and modern Star Trek shows with like the sort of higher level tech that we see in Discovery is that they just completely blame this on the fact that Pike hates new technology and that for some reason for the next 100 years he like facilitated Starfleet phasing out new like holographic tech to go old school. And so that's why like holographic tech and stuff just like was not there for like the next 100 years until like, you know, the Deep Space Nine era. And I was like, I can't believe they just decided to do all of this because Pike is just like at some point they had to explain why there were no like holographic text on the Enterprise that just like no Pike just decided we're getting rid of all that. We just had like getting taken over by the huge evil AI. I'm not having it. It's not happening. Like I think it was just like he had PTSD from like having like the whole alien invasion and like the whole AI invasion and having to deal with everything. He's just like, no. I've had my time crystal thing. I had to save the universe. I'm not dealing with holographic new tech that's going to give me any more heart attacks.
Take your holograms and stuff it, right? We're not doing that, right? We're just not doing that here.
He's just like, it's not happening. I'm sticking to view screens. I don't care if it makes me look like a grandmother. That's exactly what we're gonna do. I just think it's really funny because like at some point when you think about it, like in the cage, they were like doing printouts, and I was like, is there a printer somewhere that I should know about? So like, is somebody's going to be getting paper cuts at some point. I feel like.
Well, I know I've talked about this before, but one of the movies I always think about is 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was made at the exact same time as the original series. And if you go look at 2001: A Space Odyssey, like it holds up. You know, as far as like what, like them operating the spaceship and like the stuff they're doing and like the panels and the lights and, you know, just the whole like, you know, not that the movie's about that, but just like the whole operation of the spaceships that they have, you know, and the Pan Am flight at the beginning of the movie. I don't know if you've seen this film, but it just holds up, you know, it just holds up. And they had a vision of how things might be, and they hit the money on that one, right? And Trek, you know, they weren't really trying to forecast the tech future. They were really about the stories, and that's where, you know, and I like to poke fun at this stuff, but I think sometimes people like expect too much of the show.
Yeah. I just think it's funny.
Yeah, you know, but people like to really invest themselves in this stuff and be like, no, this is the future Star Trek showed us, and it's like, dude, that is not what the show is about. You know, it is just not about that. I mean, if you want to follow the through line in your conversation, right? In Deep Space Nine, they made a whole thing about that holographic communication system in one episode, and then we never saw it again.
That's the thing, right? It's just like you have new things, and then you're just like, "What? No, well, never heard about that again."
Yep, off it went.
That was one of my funniest things. Was like I remember watching TOS, and they had like one episode where they just like figured out time travel.
Yep.
Without like time crystals or anything, and then they just like never mentioned it again. And I was like, so we had a whole entire season in Discovery where we're like trying to figure out the whole time travel stuff, and you tell me like they figured it out in like a day and a half. And then they were just like, yeah, sure, no, well, we're never gonna use time travel to fix any of our mistakes ever again.
Well, I think that Star Trek, and I've said this many times on the show, is like people are trying to cash a check that never got written, right? Star Trek never promised us a consistent universe. It's just not a thing. It is just not a thing, and the writers, like going right back to the original show, TOS, were never interested in like following line for line, word for word, like world building. It is just not a thing that Star Trek does. And I think that people, to their detriment, have tried to hold Star Trek to that standard, right? And I think it's more about the people, it's more about the kinds of stories and sort of the lessons of the show that they're trying to talk about. That's what they were going for. And if you approach it on those terms, you don't get disappointed, right? It's when you sit there and you're like, well, couldn't they have used this thing from 7 shows ago in episode 4? They came up with this technology that would have solved that, and it's like, just calm down, bro, calm down.
Yeah, I mean, like you have to, like, at some point you have to just accept the fact that the shows were made in a different time with very different intentions, that certain things were just never, like, they were never really meant to be in that sort of like serialized way that we expect storytelling to be nowadays. Like nowadays, certain things would be like, okay, this have to connect to that has to connect to that, things have to make sense, but like, that's not really how they did stories back then. It was just kind of like, you do the next story after that, and, people might tune in to watch this story. They might not tune in for the next, 5 other stories. So, like, you just have to, like, things make up and they happen as they go along. And that's kind of just how things were. And, and I always say, like, it's one thing to expect, like, one show to stay consistent with itself, or one episode to stay consistent within itself, but it's a whole entire other thing to expect a show across 55 years that's had different showrunners, different writers, and different actors and creatives coming in to be entirely in line with each other. Like, that's just, it's impossible to do. Like, you can generally say, oh, these main important things stay the same, but the little stuff is going to change. And that's true of like any story and any franchise and any timeline. Like even something that's, pretty meticulously plotted, like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, has its holes, has things that don't make sense, timelines that don't make sense. And that's just like, it's one of those things you're like, okay, you just have to kind of accept that. That's how storytelling is sometimes. That, as long as the internal story logic works and it's consistent with what they present, that's kind of the thing that matters. You're there to tell a story. You're not there to create an actual, Lego block universe. And I think about what Leonard Nimoy said when Star Trek 2009 came out, and he had that whole thing about how, canon is just things that people use, when they want to, like, when they're all sort of obsessed over the minutia, when they cling to the minutia of what's going on. Star Trek is just about where does this franchise want to take me next? What is the next story? What do we got? And I think, that's kind of the way that I feel like people should approach Star Trek. And I think, Leonard Nimoy, bless him, is very wise. And I think he, of all people, since he's been there from the beginning, will understand that, stories grow and they evolve. And you can't always say, oh, something that was written 55 years ago must always stay the same way or will always work the same way. Certain stories might have worked in the 60s, but may not work on a, audience in the 2021s, or, even a story written in 2021 may not work, 50 years from now in the future. And so I feel like, Star Trek has to always grow and change with the times. And if that means sometimes you have to let go of certain canonical things, then let it go. It's okay. The story that you're telling is more important than the minutia of what specifically happened on this day, in this episode, in this story. Like I think about like things like, Turnabout Intruder, where they say, oh, your world of starship captains don't accept women. Like that doesn't make sense when you think about it. Like even in the 60s era, when you're trying to tell the story where like, Starfleet is this utopia civilization, it doesn't make sense.
Starfleet is not a utopia.
Captains. And so, now
I would dispute that. I would dispute a lot of things. Like people talk about the Federation being like, a utopia. I would dispute that.
Only because I would.
When you limit yourself to the things you see on the screen, and you say, this is what we're being shown about what the Federation does in certain circumstances and what life is like, it's a pretty hard case to make that it's a utopian society, in my opinion.
I mean, there are some very shifty things. I mean, a lot of shifty things here and there. And I think, stuff like, what we see in Deep Space Nine, and I think what they show in Picard as well, really kind of points to the fact that, this utopia, it feels like maybe utopia when you look at it from a certain angle that's, very glossy angle. But when you really look beneath the surface, it's not as pretty as, we like to think it is. I think it's one of those things that I think I appreciate, these new stories, that what they tell is kind of looking at the fact that, like, we want Starfleet to be this, utopian thing. It may never be that way, but we can certainly always try to be that way. And I like that, it kind of confronts our notion of like the status quo of what we're used to, what we're safe, who we feel safe with. And, I like that it plays into that whole, it's easy to be a saint in paradise, and the whole concept of, I remember Bashir in the DS9 episode Past Tense talks about like, how did people let, this thing happen in San Francisco in the, 2024? And then like, it makes me think, what happens, would this happen in the Federation? And then lo and behold, we have a story that's, set 30 years later where this does happen in the Federation. We have, banning androids, and there's a whole, slew of consequences that come from that story. So I think, it's one of those things I love, the tapestry of Star Trek, of like continually evolving and telling the story of the world is changing, and our views of how we see the Federation changes, and how what we want the Federation to be also changes. I think it's just so fascinating, like to have different storytellers come in and look at the story from different angles. And and I remember that line from Harry Mudd in the first season of Discovery when he's talking to Lorca in that Klingon prison cell, where you and your lofty Starfleet, you go start a war, and you never think about the fact that, like, what do other people, like, what does the civilians think? What do the rest of the galaxy think about Starfleet went out there and got us a whole bunch of trouble, and it's so fascinating. Like, I would just love a story that's like, a colony or like a civilian type of story. Like, cause I always felt like the reason that we see Starfleet as this like perfect utopia, quote unquote, that, we should strive to, and it's so perfect and it's everything that we want, it's because all of our stories really are Federation point of view. Our characters are Federation and Starfleet characters who view that world and that institution in a certain way. But then if you have a character whose story is not Federation, is not Starfleet, you can look at that universe and the stories that we're telling in a completely different way. So like, if you have a story about Harry, he would look at Starfleet in a completely different light. And how how the story frames Starfleet would be different.
never forget that Harry Mudd is pretty much engaging in sex trafficking, right? In the utopian world of the Federation.
Exactly.
Right? Straight up in TOS.
And we even see their Federation worlds, Ardana on the Cloud Miners in TOS, where they essentially have a Federation planet that endorses slavery.
Are they a Federation planet?
Yeah.
Are they? Oh wow! Okay.
Well, I mean, if they're not a Federation planet, they're at least aligned with the Federation, and they're working Federation because they're providing resources for the Federation. So the fact that this resource is mined from the labor of inferior, quote unquote, slave workers is like, okay, does the Federation not look through who they're interacting with to see maybe don't align with the people who are slave laborers,
That's it, boo. Cancel the Federation. They're tainted.
There are so many things that when you really go back to watch Star Trek episodes in the way that certain stories are written, I don't think they intended it for it to be that way. But when you look at it and you're just like, wait a second, this is if you want to say Starfleet is a utopia, no, not really. I don't know what you
I mean, they made a few hints in the show that everything's supposed to be so great. They make allusions to it, but when you actually just look at what you're shown and just respond to it, it's very different. And so my feeling has always been this utopian thing is really just a fan invention. And even some of the people who've been involved in the show have even said it about the show or about the Federation. But when you just limit it to the four corners of the screen and be like, here's what we're dealing with, and you have to explain away all these different things the trafficking of the women, and some of the other things that the Federation does. It's really just, a private little war and what went on there. This is really bad stuff. So it's so
weird.
Yeah. But, I do think that the whole reason for the time jump in Discovery, they said, the people involved with the show said the reason we're doing this is because it was too hard to try to maintain continuity with everything, right? We just had to escape the whole premise of Discovery was this prequel, and we just didn't want to deal with it anymore, right? And that's what they said.
It makes sense though, because if you think about it, at some point you're running up against certain things that if you want to go tell different stories, especially with the Discovery being the way that it is, I think it's hard to tell those stories. It's one thing to say, oh, the Enterprise can go into a deep space mission and run around and look for all these, cool aliens. Discovery, you could essentially say the spore drive stopped working or whatever. There's certainly avenues for them to tell those stories. But then we come back to the thing where then Discovery becomes another sort of TOS show,
right.
It's just go to a different planet, look at science stuff and do the same thing. And I think, I think with all the interviews that Alex Kurtzman gives is that they want to do stories with different kinds of variety.
Yeah.
And I think that, they should, you don't want 5 shows that are basically the exact same thing that you've already done a million different times, And I think what's brilliant about this new era of Star Trek is that we can have these wildly different shows that tell different stories in very different ways. Discovery can jump in different time and space and, go around and do all these cool and crazy things and jump to the far future and tell an entirely different tale. And then you have Picard, which can be a very intimate character story. And then you have Lower Decks, which is, just everybody's kind of having fun and it's kind of goofy. And you look at it, you kind of poke fun at the way that, Star Trek kind of works. And then you have Strange New Worlds, which is, is the kind of exploration story. And so having all that variety, I think, is so genius.
Yeah,
and
it's great.
It's so much fun because then you're not having that problem that I think the 90s ran into where stories just felt like you were kind of doing the same thing over and over again, where, people can't tell the difference between TNG and DS9 and Voyager. They're kind of just different locations, same thing. And it's almost like, when people joke about like, oh, having the next, CSI show is just the same stuff in a different city, but it's like essentially kind of what it is. And so I like the fact that, we're in a different position now where we aren't afraid to say, you know what, we're going to do a 930-year jump into the future. We're going to do different stories. It's going to be wild. We're going to like hop around the galaxy, do all sorts of cool things, and deal with weird space phenomenons and save the galaxy, and that's really cool because, I love the idea of just introducing crazy new things into Star Trek and just say, hey, what are we going to do with this? Let's play around with it and figure out, like, does it work? And the premise of Discovery, when they had the plans in the beginning, was like, I think originally was an anthology show.
Yeah, it was going to be like American Horror Story, if you're familiar with that, where every season might have the same actors, but a different setup.
Yeah, and, obviously they weren't really going to go for that idea, but I think in a way they played into that same idea, whereas it's now just every few seasons, maybe they jump a few years around the timeline with the same characters, but they're like dealing with entirely different scenarios, like, it was a war story, and then it was a time figuring out how to like find time travel and save the galaxy. And then now you've jumped into the far future where you're at a disadvantage and you have to save, the Federation and try to figure out, what does everything do? How does it work? Like, oh my God, my communicator can now do 3 different things instead of 1, and like, I just like, it's so exciting to me because I feel like having new Star Trek now is like, it must have been what people watching TOS, back in the old days, that must have been what it felt like, because everything was new. Like, you didn't know what to expect. You didn't know what the next story could be, what this world was going to be like. And,
right.
there's no safety net for you to fall back on and just say like, oh, well, this is exactly what we expected this.
One of the experiences I've talked about on the show before was, little 9-year-old me going into the movie theater to see, I was 9, going in to see Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Because if you put yourself back at the time, I mean, shows coming back was not a thing that was done. Yeah. Like today, they're redoing everything. Like how many Spider-Mans have there been, right? I mean, like 87 as of the date of this recording, right? And they're probably making more, right? We've got 16 different Star Wars shows. We've got Marvel Cinematic Universe, and so it's a normalized thing. But back then, like, in the minds of the fans, the original series with like the little animated series they had after it, that's all there was. And that's all there was ever, going to be. And the whole idea that like, this new show, they talked about bringing it back, but it never went anywhere for a long time. In my last released episode, I actually talked to my previous guest about this. And so the idea that like there was this movie coming out, and like I just remembered sitting in the movie theater and just like looking at the Klingon attack and V'ger and just being like, what is happening? I mean, it was just an experience, that today like you can't really recapture because they're bringing back everything. And so it's normal in a way that at the time it wasn't. And it was just a really powerful moment for me in my fandom experience. I don't know.
It's it feels like it feels like the experience I had with Star Trek 2009, because once Star Trek went off the air with Enterprise, I think even though like the time span was actually quite quick, now that like I think back on it, it was only like 4 years, but like we were all convinced that Star Trek was done. This was done. It was going to be in the bin. We were never going to have it back. So it was so strange to go into that movie theater and see Star Trek on the big screen, because I had never had that experience of seeing Star Trek in a movie theater. Like my Star Trek experience was watching it on, like DVDs and stuff.
Sure.
And so it was so strange to not only say like, oh, there's more Star Trek? You mean like this isn't dead in the water and I'm like never going to see it again? but like also, oh, it's back like in a movie theater. Like we're gonna actually get a budget,
Yeah.
like and do cool things. And I just remember like the first like the trailers for Star Trek 2009. It was just I remember feeling like completely in awe because like I felt like I couldn't believe that this was Star Trek. First of all, I was
Yeah.
like, we're like the budget was so high and everything looked so cool, and it was like the way I imagine the future to look like in
Exactly
my
right.
head as a kid, and then to watch that movie take place and like just like the booming sound in the theater and like everything and that opening like 11 minutes, which I still think is the greatest cold open
Captain
in
Robau is my homie.
yeah.
He's my
And
guy.
I mean like it was just it was so crazy. Like all I remember, I was like, I don't think I've ever like been hurt by a movie so suddenly, like watching it, and it was just like I was like completely entrenched in like immediately, and it was like it was so crazy because I felt like the weight of the story was there, the space stuff was like everything I had envisioned, like
Yeah.
this must be like what Gene Roddenberry envisioned in his head if he had the money to do Star Trek the way we're doing it now. Like just the glory.
Lens flares and all.
Yeah, maybe lens flares, a few more extra boobs maybe here and there. Like it was just so exciting. Like I just couldn't like there was that feeling of like this was going to be the beginning of something really cool that like we've never had before. And
right on.
and now like when I watch new Star Trek shows, I'm always just like it feels like I don't know what's going to happen. Like I had no idea. There's no way to predict where the story goes. Like they can do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And we really don't have an idea. And then like the only show I feel like we have some clue of stuff is maybe things like Strange New World and Lower Decks. But like even then, we don't know where those stories are going.
Yeah, same thing with Prodigy. No idea.
Yeah, and Prodigy is just completely like that show could be something else bonkers and entirely different than anything we've ever seen ever. And I'm so excited about that because it's so cool.
Yeah.
Like to have these different stories and different shows and different tones and to like look at a Star Trek show and have a different experience with it. Whereas like Discovery will make me feel one way and then Picard will make me feel another way. And then watching Lower Decks will make me feel something else. And then the short treks will make me feel something else. And like all these different stories, it's just like they all have their own unique tone. And it's so exciting because, like we didn't think that Star Trek was gonna come back in this way. Right. And then I think even with the Kelvin timeline movies, we thought with Beyond, we're back to that dead in the water kind of phase. And then suddenly we're back and there's all these new shows, and it's so exciting to like be in this era of like getting excited about Star Trek shows and all the things that it could be and all the things that we could still explore and all the different stories we could still tell of like, just the different ways of looking at the world that I can't wait to see like what other stories they got going on, whether that's, the Giorgio show, that spinoff, or a Starfleet Academy sort of show, or like just like the possibilities are like really endless, and I love that aspect.